Whispers of forgotten nights. You are standing at the edge of a medieval village, where the air is cool and heavy with the smell of damp earth after a day of labor, and where the quiet fields lie beneath a sky scattered with countless stars. The cottages are darkened, their shutters drawn, and their hearths cooling, yet the silence is not absolute. Somewhere between the creaking of wooden beams and the lowing of cattle settling in their pens, a murmur drifts, light as smoke, almost intangible, yet carrying the strange weight of anticipation. These murmurs are not the sound of dreams, for the villagers do not sleep. Rather, they gather in small knots, whispering in hushed tones of something that lies just beyond the ordinary rhythm of their toil, something that happens when the sun has long since yielded the world to the dominion of night. Tales have passed from parent to child, from elder to youth, that in certain places, when the moon climbs high, people do not rest. Instead, they leave behind their cottages, their bread ovens, and their familiar routines, stepping into the darkness with an urgency they cannot resist. What awaits is not prayer, nor market, nor war, but a strange communion of bodies, a festival of motion, where the villagers are seized by the need to dance. You see them speak of these gatherings not as if they are mere entertainments, for in truth, they are not entirely joyful. There is laughter, yes, and there are bursts of song, but beneath each tale lies an undertone of unease, a knowledge that what begins as merriment often ends in collapse. Some of the elders recall nights when their brothers or sisters danced until their legs gave way beneath them, when lips foamed, when breath came ragged and shallow, and when only the cool earth finally forced stillness upon them. And yet, though fear clings to the memory, the gatherings return, as though the villagers are bound by a thread invisible, a call that neither church bells nor lordly decrees can silence. It is whispered that perhaps the saints themselves call forth these dances, or that demons hidden in the dark coax men and women into losing themselves in steps without end. Others murmur of curses lingering from forgotten times, when pagan gods still walked Europe's forests, demanding tribute in ways no priest dares now to name. When you close your eyes, you can imagine the scene, the small lanes emptying, the crunch of straw beneath leather shoes, the faint glow of lanterns swaying from rough-hewn poles, each light bobbing like a firefly above the heads of villagers moving as one. They are not entirely certain where they are going, nor why they feel compelled to move, only that to resist is impossible. The old women lean on their canes, muttering that the young will waste themselves to the bone, but even their voices tremble with a strange awe, for all know that these nights are not of man's choosing. They come unbidden, like storms, sweeping across the countryside, leaving exhaustion in their wake. It is said that those who lived centuries ago knew well the difference between ordinary feast days and these peculiar nights. On feast days, there was roast meat, music from fiddles and bagpipes, and laughter spilling like wine into every corner of the village. Those were times of controlled joy, permitted by both priest and lord, a release from the drudgery of fields and furnaces. But the nights of the dances were something different. They came suddenly, without sanction, without cause, and often at the most inconvenient of times. It mattered not if hay needed harvesting, or if the sheep were lambing, or if a holy day of penance lay ahead. When the call to dance arrived, all other duties were abandoned. The villagers whispered that they heard faint strains of music drifting on the night air, pipes, flutes, and drums, though no players were seen, urging them forth into circles that seemed to spin endlessly, as if the earth itself pulled their feet. And though you may stand as an outsider, gazing into this world as though through a window of time, you can feel the mixture of fascination and dread that permeates the villagers' lives. They do not seek to question too deeply the source of the frenzy, for to name it might be to invite its power more strongly. Instead, they live with its memory, telling stories in cautious tones, always careful not to tempt fate by speaking too openly. They recall how, after such nights, the town square would be littered with exhausted bodies, some alive, gasping as if dragged from drowning waters, others silent, unmoving, claimed by the dance itself. They whisper of children carried home limp in their mothers' arms, of fathers staggering into dawn with eyes still wild, as if haunted by invisible melodies. Such stories pass from mouth to mouth, weaving themselves into the fabric of the village's identity, until even the smallest child grows up knowing that there are forces in the night beyond the grasp of reason. Priests attempt to soothe the people, reminding them of God's order, of obedience to the sacraments, of the surety of prayer, yet even they falter when the bells ring out, and still the villagers slip into the dark. Lords may threaten with whips and fines, yet find themselves powerless before the pull of a force so ancient and unseen. Thus the whispers continue, low and ever-present, like wind through the rafters, reminding all who listen that there exist habits in mankind not born of choice, but of mystery. And as you imagine yourself there, standing amid the hushed gathering, you sense the weight of centuries pressing in. For though these tales belong to the Middle Ages, they are not merely curiosities of history, they are echoes of something deeply human, a need to lose oneself in motion, in rhythm, in a community bound not by law but by shared surrender. It is a reminder that, in that age of stone churches and plagues, of castles rising against the horizon and fields tilled by hand, there was still something that defied explanation, something that drew men and women into the night, compelled to dance until their strength was gone. And so begins the long story, the unbroken thread of strange festivals, of frenzied gatherings under the stars, of villagers who surrendered their bodies to rhythms both heard and unheard. These whispers of forgotten nights are but the threshold, a first glimpse into the world of medieval dance, where exhaustion and ecstasy walked hand in hand, and where the line between sacred and profane was blurred beneath the turning of countless feet. The tolling of midnight bells, the night deepens, and with it comes the sound that has, for centuries, marked the passage of sacred time, the slow tolling of the monastery bell. It reverberates across the valley, echoing through the forests, bouncing from the stone walls of towers, and rolling over the cottages where families should be asleep. The bell is meant to call monks to prayer, reminding them of their vows and of the order of heaven that does not sleep. But beyond the cloister walls, in the villages scattered like tiny stars across the darkened land, the ringing means something quite different. For many peasants, its slow, solemn chime signals the moment when their strange compulsion grows strongest. As the monks file into their chapels, reciting psalms in measured voices, the common folk slip from their beds, wrapping shawls about their shoulders, fastening their belts, and stepping barefoot onto cold earth. You watch them move cautiously at first, for though the village sleeps, they know their steps are neither sanctioned nor wholly innocent. The priests in their pulpits have warned against such gatherings, calling them sinful, ungodly, or worse, works of the devil himself. Yet the villagers cannot resist. The bell, meant to guard them against darkness, instead becomes the signal that darkness is stirring. Couples glance at one another in silence before slipping out. Children cling to their mothers' hands, and groups of friends gather by the edges of the fields, where shadows seem less oppressive when shared. The tolling fades into the night, leaving behind only a silence filled with anticipation. It is in that silence that the first strains of music begin to rise, not always from a musician you can see, but sometimes from nowhere at all, drifting faintly, as if the air itself remembers a melody. The monastery itself stands aloof, its towers silhouetted against the moonlight. Inside, monks chant with measured breaths, their Latin hymns steady, ordered, and precise. Yet even they cannot help but hear of the commotion beyond their walls, and though they are forbidden to speak of it, the younger brothers whisper to one another about the festivals that leave entire villages trembling. Some call them dance fevers, others Satan's games. Still others mutter of Street Vitus, whose name is often invoked when no explanation suffices. The tension between sacred order and wild frenzy hangs thick in the air, so palpable that even the bells seem conflicted. Do they toll for prayer, or do they mark the beginning of another night of madness? In the town square, you can imagine the figures gathering, their lanterns swaying, their breath steaming in the cold. A young man, flushed with eagerness, stamps his foot in rhythm, impatient for the musicians to begin. A woman, her face lined with years, frowns at him, muttering that such eagerness will be punished by morning. Yet even she does not turn away. Something in her eyes betrays a memory perhaps of her own youth, when she too danced until her body collapsed on the cobblestones. The bell has called them all, though it was never meant for them. It is a curious inversion. While monks withdraw into silence, peasants rush into motion, each seeking a different kind of salvation. The lords in their keeps notice as well. From the high windows of a stone hall, a noble might peer down toward the faint glow of torches in the fields. He knows well enough what such gatherings mean, and though his duty is to keep order, he hesitates. To intervene is risky. The villagers, once seized by the rhythm, do not heed commands or whips. Yet to ignore the festivals is also dangerous, for rumors spread quickly, and the church frowns upon negligence. Thus, the noble watches, torn between fear of the priest's judgment and fear of his own people, who, once possessed by the dance, seem to answer to no earthly lord. The tolling of bells was supposed to divide the sacred hours, reminding each man of his place in God's design. Midnight belonged to prayer, dawn to labor, evening to rest. But here, in the strange heart of the Middle Ages, the lines blur. Midnight no longer belongs entirely to monks or angels. It belongs also to peasants who move as though compelled, to bodies swaying in moonlit fields, to faces both joyous and tormented, to feet that strike the earth in unison until the very ground trembles beneath them. Midnight becomes a threshold, a time when heaven's order collides with earth's chaos, and when ordinary men and women find themselves caught in the pull of something vast and unexplainable. You hear it in the stories told afterward, how a mother swore she only meant to fetch water, yet found herself spinning with her neighbours until the stars faded, how a farmer left his oxen tethered, but woke the next day in the fields, his feet blistered and bleeding, his body still twitching with phantom steps. Each tale begins with the tolling of bells, and so the sound takes on a dual nature, holy for some, fateful for others. The monks insist it is a call to prayer. The villagers know it as the hour when bodies no longer belong to themselves. The bells fade at last, their echo swallowed by the hills, but by then the people are already gone, moving toward the gathering places where music and madness await. The night, now truly theirs, is ready to unfold. The lanterns along the river. The river lies quiet beneath the moon, its surface like a sheet of black glass, rippling only when a night breeze passes over, or when the shadow of a fish disturbs its skin. Along its banks, the reeds sway gently, whispering to one another as if they too are restless in the darkness. This river, winding its way past mills and meadows, has seen generations of villagers toil by day, washing clothes, watering livestock, and drawing buckets of water for their homes. But in the strange hours after the bells have faded and the monks have returned to their prayers, the river becomes something else entirely. It becomes a guide, a pathway, lit not by the sun, but by flickering lanterns swaying in the hands of villagers. Step by step, they follow its curves into the night, as though it were the artery of the land, leading them to the heart of the festival that awaits. You watch them emerge from narrow lanes and crooked doorways, their figures cloaked in wool, their shoes scuffing against stones. Each carries a light, some in simple clay lamps, others in horn-covered lanterns, their glow dim and warm, like small captive suns. Children cling to their mothers, fascinated by the dancing shadows, while young men stride ahead with torches that sputter and smoke. As they walk, their flames cast reflections across the water, so that the river appears to shimmer with dozens of wavering stars. From a distance, the scene seems otherworldly, a long line of light moving slowly through the dark, as though the villagers themselves are constellations fallen to earth, seeking their place once more in the heavens. There is a rhythm to their journey, not yet the frenzy of dance, but a quieter, anticipatory pulse. Their voices are hushed, for though many are eager, they cannot ignore the unease that lies beneath their steps. Some mutter prayers under their breath, fingering rosaries or crossing themselves against unseen spirits. Others exchange nervous laughter, trying to dispel the weight of silence pressing down from the hills. The sound of the river soothes them, its murmur like a lullaby, a reminder of constancy in a world full of uncertainty. Yet even the river seems to change on these nights, as if it too leans in to listen, aware that something unusual is unfolding along its course. Not all who follow the lanterns do so willingly. You see a man pulled along by his companions, his face drawn, his lips pressed tight as though he fears what lies ahead. An old woman mutters to herself, each step reluctant, though her eyes betray the same glimmer of compulsion that drives the rest. These festivals are not entirely chosen. They arrive like storms, and resistance is rare. To stay behind is to risk being marked as strange or cursed, and so even those who fear the gatherings find themselves among the crowd, their lanterns swaying alongside their neighbours. In this way, the procession along the river becomes a binding act, one that knits the village together, whether through joy, fear, or simple necessity. Along the way, the villagers pass familiar landmarks that take on new meaning in the night. A mill wheel, usually creaking with the weight of its task, lies motionless, yet its silhouette against the moon seems ominous, as though watching. A small chapel stands empty, its door shut tight, while behind it a group of youths pause to whisper before hurrying on. The wooden bridge groans beneath the press of many feet, its timbers echoing with hollow sounds that mingle with the laughter of children. Each place, each sound, becomes part of the journey, and the lanterns reveal details that daylight would dismiss: the gleam of dew on grass, the startled flash of a hare, the patterns of frost spreading across stones. There are stories told of these processions, of how sometimes the lanterns stretched for miles, so many that travellers passing on horseback mistook them for signs of an army marching by night. Some chroniclers, years later, would record seeing hundreds moving in silence, their lights winding through valleys like a serpent of fire. They did not stop for rest or speech, but pressed forward as though guided by an unseen hand, the river beside them their only companion. Whether such accounts are embellished or not, they capture something of the awe these gatherings inspired. For in a world where darkness often meant danger and silence carried the weight of fear, to see so many neighbours united in a single movement was as unsettling as it was wondrous. At last, the river widens into a meadow where the ground is flat and open, a place where bonfires can be built and musicians can play without walls to confine their sound. The villagers fan out across the field, setting their lanterns in a circle or hanging them from branches, until the meadow glows with a trembling light that seems to resist the pull of night. The river reflects it all, doubling the flames, making the place appear larger, brighter, more alive than it is. Here, at this threshold, the festival begins. The lanterns that guided them are now guardians of the circle, silent witnesses to the frenzy that is soon to unfold. The people gather closer, their faces illuminated, their shadows long and wavering, each of them waiting, breath held, for the first note of music to pierce the air. And in that suspended moment, as the river flows beside them and the lanterns burn like captive stars, you realize that the night has fully claimed them. The tolling bells are long forgotten, the quiet cottages lie empty, and the village itself has emptied into the meadow. What remains is no longer ordinary life, but a step into the strange, the uncanny, and the irresistible world of the night dance. The lanterns, flickering and patient, will keep watch until dawn, bearing witness as bodies move until collapse beneath the indifferent gaze of the moon. Drums and pipes in the darkness. The meadow waits in silence, the lanterns swaying faintly, their light bending with the night wind. Then, from the edge of the crowd, there comes the first beat, a hollow thud of a drum, struck not with flourish, but with steady certainty, like a heartbeat amplified into the night. Heads turn, eyes widen, and the children hush their nervous chatter, for they know that this is the true beginning. Another drum joins, its voice deeper, slower, as if echoing from the belly of the earth. The villagers shift closer together, their bodies responding instinctively, feet tapping, shoulders swaying, though no command has been spoken. And then, as though the darkness itself were drawing breath, the high, sharp call of a pipe cuts through the air. The note is piercing, thin, almost shrill, yet beneath its sharpness lies a strange allure, like the cry of a bird that cannot be ignored. The music grows, layer upon layer, as more pipes join, their reedy tones winding together into twisting melodies. Some are lively, quick, and playful, while others drone with a haunting persistence, a sound that seems less like music and more like an incantation. It is not polished, for these are not trained court musicians but wandering minstrels, shepherd boys, and fiddlers with rough hands. Their instruments are made of wood, gut, and horn, crafted with care but never destined for grandeur. Yet the rawness of their sound is what gives it power, what allows it to slip past reason and lodge itself in the marrow of those who listen. You watch the villagers draw into circles, their movements small at first, hands linked, heads bent, steps tentative. They sway like stalks of wheat caught in a breeze, their feet moving in rhythm with the drums. But as the pipes trill higher, the circles tighten and the pace quickens. One by one, laughter bursts from their lips, the tension of the walk forgotten, replaced by the giddy thrill of surrender. Children spin until they stumble, their lantern shadows tumbling across the grass. Young men leap high, stomping their feet with force enough to shake the ground. Women sway with skirts swirling, their voices rising in half-sung chants that blend with the melody, until it is no longer clear whether the music comes from instruments or from the people themselves. The drums pound faster, no longer steady heartbeats but frantic pulses, as though imitating the racing of blood. The pipers push their melodies higher, shriller, piercing through the night like calls that beckon from another world. The villagers cannot hold themselves apart any longer. Even those who tried to resist now find their limbs betraying them, their feet carrying them forward into the circle. They are caught, not merely listening but inhabited, as though the music has entered their bodies, animating them like puppets. The meadow begins to tremble with the weight of stamping feet, and the river beside it shivers with reflected firelight. There are those who later swear they heard more than human instruments that night. Some claim they caught faint notes that did not come from any pipe or drum. They could see a phantom fiddler hidden in the dark, a flute played by unseen hands, a rhythm that seemed to rise from the earth itself. Chroniclers, writing with ink many years later, would record such testimonies, unable to decide whether they were mere superstition or evidence of something darker at play. The villagers, however, knew better than to question. They felt the sound in their bones, and whether mortal or not, it compelled them. As the hours pass, the frenzy builds. Sweat gleams on brows, hands slip from one another, only to find new partners, and the circle grows wider, then tighter again, as if breathing. The pipes shriek, the drums thunder, and the dancers move with abandon. Some smile with pure joy, others grimace with strain, yet none stop. It is as though the music has become law, and obedience is no longer a choice. They dance until their vision blurs, until their legs ache, until the world narrows into rhythm and motion, and still the drums and pipes drive them on, merciless in their persistence. From the shadows at the edge of the meadow, the watchers, priests, lords, or weary elders stand uneasily. To them, the sound is not merely music but a danger, a force that pulls at the order of the world. The priests cross themselves, whispering prayers against temptation, while the nobles shift uncomfortably, knowing their authority holds little sway here. The music belongs to no one and to everyone. It does not ask permission, it takes. The night deepens, the lanterns gutter in the wind, and still the meadow rings with sound. Pipes trill like birds of prey, drums pound like war, and voices cry out in wordless song. You realize, standing at the edge, with your gaze fixed upon the dancers, that this is not entertainment but possession. The music, born of simple wood and skin, has become something greater than itself. It is no longer sound carried through air. It is a force that seizes bodies, bends wills, and demands surrender. And, as the river murmurs beside the meadow, as the lanterns burn lower, and as the stars watch silently overhead, you understand why these nights are feared and remembered. For once the drums and pipes begin, there is no telling when or how they will end. Masks, disguises, and secret joy. The meadow is alive with the music of drums and pipes, the dancers' steps rising into frenzy, when suddenly you notice that many faces among the circle are not what they seem. Some have covered their features with masks carved crudely from wood, painted in garish colours that flicker in the firelight. Others wear veils of coarse cloth or wreaths of ivy twisted around their brows, their eyes peering out like glimmers of hidden flame. Even a strip of soot smeared across the cheeks, or a hood drawn low over the face, transforms the villagers into beings less ordinary, more mysterious, as though the people who toiled in daylight fields have vanished, replaced by shadows of another world. In these disguises, there is a strange liberation, a chance to shed the burdens of rank, labor, and sin, if only for a night. You sense the power of anonymity as the villagers move among one another. The Lord's steward, who by day commands obedience with stern words, now whirls with peasants whose names he would not otherwise deign to speak. A woman widowed too young, her face usually veiled in grief, dons a mask of grinning teeth and finds herself laughing again, spinning with children as if no sorrow had ever touched her. A shepherd boy ties feathers to his brow, strutting like a bird of the forest, no longer the servant of flocks but a creature untamed. In disguise, the divisions of life collapse, replaced by a communion in which all are equal under the gaze of the moon. The masks serve more than play. They shield the wearers from judgment. For the priests who condemn the dances, who warn of demons lurking in the music, often name faces when they preach. But a face hidden is harder to accuse. Behind a mask, a man might drink, sing, or embrace a woman, not his wife, without fear of recognition. Behind a veil, a girl might laugh too freely, taste forbidden wine, or whirl until her body collapses, and no one could claim with certainty that they saw her there. Masks make the dance a place outside ordinary law, a realm where sin and joy mingle, where consequences are delayed until morning light. And yet, for all the freedom they grant, the masks also carry whispers of older times. Some are painted with strange patterns, spirals, animals, half-familiar symbols that speak of rituals long before the church planted its crosses in these valleys. An elder woman, bent with age, mutters that such symbols come from the pagans, from the days when villagers honored spirits of earth and river, rather than saints of stone and scripture. Whether the dancers know this or not, they wear the symbols proudly, delighting in the strangeness that allows them to become someone else, or something else. For a night, the meadow, filled with firelight and masks, resembles less a village gathering than a dream, or perhaps a masquerade of ghosts risen from the past. You can almost feel the shift in the air. With each mask donned, each identity abandoned, the dancers sink deeper into abandon. They laugh louder, their steps grow wilder, and their eyes gleam brighter. Freed from themselves, they find a strange joy, a joy too dangerous for daylight. Children imitate their elders, tying scraps of cloth around their faces, pretending to be wolves or saints, their squeals piercing the night. Lovers steal glances behind their veils, emboldened to touch hands, to share secret smiles, their true names hidden by painted wood. Even the shyest among them finds courage, knowing no one can see the hesitation in their eyes. But beneath the joy lies something more unsettling, for in masks, one can forget not only shame but also self. A man who by day is kind may, behind a leering mask, shove another aside, his laughter cruel. A woman, freed from recognition, may shout blasphemies that by daylight she would never dare to whisper. Some, hidden too well, seem no longer part of the village at all, but strangers, even enemies, whose eyes glint with malice as they whirl. In this way, the festival becomes dangerous, for with the loss of face comes the loosening of restraint. It is not only joy that is freed, but chaos. The priests know this well, and it is why they fear the masks most of all. For while dancing in itself might be pardoned as foolishness, masks make it something darker, a world where identities blur, where a man could be demon or saint, where women move like witches and children like sprites. In the eyes of the church, such disguises open the door to temptation and possession, making the meadow less a place of merriment and more a playground for spirits. And yet, try as they might, the priests cannot stop the villagers from donning their veils and painted wood. For once a man has known the freedom of losing himself, he is reluctant to return to the weight of his name and place. You see it most clearly as the night deepens. A circle of dancers, their faces hidden, their laughter rising in a cacophony that is both joyous and frightening. They are no longer husband, wife, son, daughter, serf, or steward. They are shadows in firelight, figures who move beyond themselves, embodying the secret joy of anonymity. And as they whirl, one after another, collapsing only to rise again, You realize that this is the true essence of the strange night festivals. It is not merely the music, nor the frenzy, nor even the exhaustion that follows. It is the chance, however fleeting, to escape the self, to become unbound by the burdens of life, and to discover a joy so fierce it borders on terror. The masks, the disguises, and the secret joys they bring transform the meadow into a realm apart, a place suspended between earth and spirit. And though dawn will return, stripping away the veils, revealing the weary faces beneath, the memory of the night's freedom lingers. It lingers in whispers, in stories told with half smiles, in longing glances exchanged across the marketplace, in the knowledge that beneath the ordinary faces of neighbors lies the capacity for wildness, for strangeness, for joy too great to be spoken aloud. The frenzy of endless steps. The meadow, once a quiet field beneath the stars, is now transformed into something that feels alive, as if the earth itself thrums beneath the pounding feet of hundreds. The circle has broken and reformed many times, yet the rhythm never falters. Drums and pipes drive on, relentless as a storm, and the villagers' bodies obey, drawn forward into motion that seems to have no beginning and no end. You watch as sweat glistens on brows, dripping into eyes that blink but never close, for even blinking feels like a distraction from the overwhelming pull of rhythm. Feet strike earth in patterns first orderly, then chaotic, until the ground itself grows slick with trampled grass and churned soil. It is no longer a dance in the sense of art or celebration. It has become compulsion, a frenzy of endless steps that allows no rest. There are those who stagger, who stumble to the side, gasping for breath, only to be pulled back into the whirl by eager hands. A woman collapses, clutching her chest, yet moments later she is on her feet again, as though some invisible force has lifted her, her legs carrying her forward despite the tears streaking her cheeks. A boy, barely into his youth, spins so fast that he crashes into another dancer, his laughter breaking into sobs, yet his feet keep moving, dragging him forward even as his small frame trembles. These sights strike you with a strange blend of awe and horror. The joy of earlier hours has curdled into something more demanding, more merciless. The dance is no longer a choice. It is a command that the body cannot deny. The music has grown harsher, the drumming like thunder that never ceases, the pipes shrieking with melodies too sharp to bear. Some villagers cry out, their voices mingling with the music until it seems the instruments are playing through them. Others chant, their words lost but their tone unmistakable, an incantation of surrender, a plea for release. The masks that once brought laughter now appear grotesque, streaked with sweat, their painted grins contorted into grimaces as wearers struggle to keep pace. Skirts and tunics whip through the air, damp and heavy, while bare feet bleed against stones hidden in the grass. Yet no one stops. The frenzy holds them all, binding them as tightly as chains, though the chains are invisible, woven of rhythm and exhaustion. You recall stories whispered by chroniclers, how in Strasbourg and Aachen, in towns along the Rhine, whole villages were seized by such madness, dancing for days until bodies fell lifeless in the streets. Some said it began with a single woman, her feet moving uncontrollably, her arms flailing as though possessed. Soon others joined her, unable to resist, until the square overflowed with writhing forms. Physicians called it illness, priests called it punishment, and villagers called it fate. But all agreed that once the frenzy began, it consumed everything in its path. You see that same fate here, in this meadow, as men and women collapse only to rise again, their bodies unwilling to accept stillness. The frenzy takes on a strange rhythm of its own, different from the musician's design. It is as though the dancers are no longer following the drums and pipes, but some deeper pulse, a rhythm that beats beneath the earth itself. You can feel it if you close your eyes, a low vibration that enters through the soles of your feet, climbs your spine, and demands surrender. Perhaps this is why the dancers cannot stop, for the rhythm is not around them but within them, woven into muscle and bone. To resist would be to deny the very structure of their being. And so they dance, their steps endless, their bodies betraying them at every turn. Even those at the edge of the meadow, who came only to watch, begin to shift uneasily. Their feet tap, their hands twitch, Their shoulders sway as though some thread has caught hold of them too. Some rise, unable to resist any longer, and slip into the circle, masks or no masks, joining the throng of writhing figures. The boundary between dancer and spectator dissolves, until it seems that the whole village is caught, no one left untouched by the strange fever of motion. Only the very old and the infirm remain apart, clutching their cloaks tightly and muttering prayers, though even they cannot take their eyes from the spectacle. The frenzy has its price. You see it in the faces that twist with pain, in the hands that clutch at aching sides, in the eyes that roll back as exhaustion overtakes the mind. Some collapse entirely, lying sprawled across the grass, their chests heaving as if they had been dragged from drowning waters. And yet, even prone, their legs twitch, their feet jerk as though still dancing in dreams. Others rise again after collapse, their movements weaker but no less insistent, until they fall once more. It is a cycle without mercy, a tide that rises and falls but never recedes. The night deepens, but time has lost its meaning. Whether it is 1 hour or many, you cannot tell. The frenzy devours all sense of order, leaving only the endless repetition of steps, the pounding of drums, the shrieking of pipes. The meadow reeks of sweat, smoke, and trampled grass, a mixture both human and elemental. Overhead, the stars wheel silently, indifferent to the spectacle below, and yet, in their cold gaze, you sense the enormity of what unfolds. This is not mere revelry. It is a ritual, a surrender, a confrontation with forces beyond the human will. As dawn approaches, the frenzy does not lessen. If anything, it sharpens, as though the rising sun threatens to break its spell, and the dancers must claim what remains of the night with every last ounce of strength. You see bodies moving faster, harder, driven not by joy but by desperation. The frenzy of endless steps has consumed them, and there is no turning back. Whatever lies ahead, collapse, silence, or salvation, must come only after every drop of energy is spent, after every heart has beaten itself raw against the rhythm. Until then, the meadow belongs not to men and women, but to the dance itself, merciless, endless, eternal. Wine, honey, and bitter herbs. Around the meadow, where lanterns flicker low and torches spit smoke into the damp night air, stand tables and barrels carried down from cottages, as though the people had prepared themselves for a feast. Yet this is no ordinary banquet. It is not the roast meats of holy days, nor the sweet cakes of harvest festivals. What is brought forth on these nights is something different, something meant less to satisfy hunger than to fuel the body for its ordeal. Earthen jugs of wine are passed from hand to hand, dark liquid sloshing over rims to splash onto grass and shoes. It is thick and heavy, sometimes sour with age, sometimes sharpened with spices to disguise the roughness of its brew. The villagers drink deeply, their throats burning, their bodies warmed against the chill. With each swallow, their laughter grows louder, their movements bolder, their resistance weaker. Beside the wine are jars of honey, golden and viscous, ladled out by the spoonful or smeared onto coarse bread. Its sweetness cuts through the bitterness of the drink, coating tongues and soothing throats hoarse from shouting and song. Children smear it on their fingers, licking greedily, while elders drop it into cups of watered ale, believing it grants endurance. To them, honey is more than food, it is medicine, a gift said to come from heaven itself. In the frenzy of the dance, it becomes fuel, quick sugar coursing through blood, keeping bodies upright long past the point of exhaustion. The meadow smells of it cloying and thick, mixing strangely with the sweat of dancers and the smoke of torches. But most curious of all are the herbs, gathered from hedgerows and gardens, steeped in water or wine, crushed into pastes, or bound into little cloth bundles that are chewed between teeth. Some are sharp and bitter wormwood, mugwort, tansy leaves that make the face twist with distaste yet are swallowed nonetheless, for their bitterness is said to quicken the pulse, to strengthen the legs, to stave off weariness. Others are sweetened with mint or fennel, masking their strength, but their purpose is the same, to hold the dancers upright, to keep the frenzy alive. You see women move through the crowd offering sprigs of herbs, pressing them into sweaty palms, urging the dancers to chew, to drink, to endure. The villagers take them gladly, though their eyes betray unease. For many know that such plants are spoken of in whispers, tied to old rituals and charms, remnants of pagan lore that the priests have forbidden. Yet on nights like these, when the dance demands everything, no one dares refuse them. There are stories of herbs that do more than strengthen. Some are said to open the mind, to make the dancers hear music even when the drums fall silent. A man who chews mugwort may swear he sees the meadow glowing brighter than firelight, every lantern a star, every shadow a spirit watching. A woman who drinks a bitter draught may cry out that she hears pipes hidden in the hills, playing melodies no human fingers could summon. Others claim that the herbs numb pain, so that bleeding feet and aching limbs no longer matter. Whether these effects are real or imagined, they fuel the frenzy, carrying dancers deeper into their trance, beyond the reach of reason. Wine, honey, and herbs together form a strange communion, a banquet that feeds not the stomach but the compulsion to move. Hands tremble as they reach for the jugs, lips shine with honey, teeth grind on bitter leaves. Each swallow binds the dancers more tightly to the night, loosening the tether of caution and sharpening the desire to whirl, leap, and stamp until the world itself blurs. In this way, the meadow becomes less a place of revelry than a cauldron, its people boiling together in a mixture of sweat, wine, sweetness, and bitterness, stirred by the relentless rhythm of music. The priests who hear of these nights are quick to condemn such practices. They call the herbs witchcraft, the wine gluttony, the honey indulgence. They preach that demons slip into men through intoxication, that the devil sweetens the tongue before he seizes the soul. Some nobles echo their fears, muttering that peasants grow unruly when loosened by drink, that masks and wine together could turn into riot. Yet neither priests nor lords can prevent it. For the villagers, who toil day after day with little comfort, these strange mixtures are more than temptation, they are necessity. Without them, few could endure the frenzy. With them, even the weakest dance until dawn. The night grows deeper, and you see the effect clearly. A man drinks too heavily, stumbling forward with a roar of laughter, only to collapse in the dirt, where companions lift him again, thrusting herbs into his mouth as though they might revive him. A woman licks honey from her fingers and twirls faster, her skirts flying until she crashes into the circle, leaving others to catch her. Children, too, sip watered wine, their faces flushed, their small bodies trembling as they mimic their elders' steps. Everywhere, mouths shine with sweetness, and breaths reek of bitter draughts. The meadow smells of fermentation and herbs, pungent and wild, as though the earth itself has been turned into a great brewing vat. And you understand, as you watch, that this too is part of the mystery of the night festivals. The frenzy alone is not enough. It must be fueled, fed, sustained by strange concoctions that blur the line between medicine and magic. Wine warms the body, honey sweetens the spirit, herbs awaken hidden strength. Together, they weave a net from which no dancer can escape. They are the food of the festival, the sacrament of surrender, the sustenance of the endless steps. And as the people gulp and chew, swallow and lick, their eyes grow brighter, their bodies wilder, until they are no longer merely villagers but creatures of the night, bound to the dance by thirst, by sweetness, by bitterness, by compulsion too strong to resist. The watching priests and lords, from the edges of the meadow, where lantern light fades into shadow, figures stand apart from the whirling mass of dancers. They do not wear masks, nor do they stamp their feet or raise cups of wine. Their presence is colder, more measured, and yet no less tense. These are the priests, their dark robes gathered tightly about them, crucifixes glinting faintly in the firelight, their lips moving with hurried prayers, as though words alone might shield them from contagion. Beside them, though never too close, stand the lords and stewards, men of rank, whose heavy cloaks and polished belts set them apart from the barefoot peasants. Theirs is a different fear, not of souls damned, but of order undone. Both groups watch with the same fixed intensity, unwilling to leave, unable to intervene, each silently wrestling with what the meadow has become. The priests see in the dancers not mere folly but blasphemy. The swaying circles, the painted masks, the bitter herbs chewed in haste. These are not harmless amusements in their eyes, but rituals of rebellion against divine order. In sermons given days later, they will speak of the meadow as a battlefield between heaven and hell, where demons disguised as minstrels pipe their infernal songs, and the bodies of villagers writhe like serpents. But in this moment, their words falter, for even as they pray, their eyes betray a strange fascination. The rhythm, relentless and inescapable, tugs at their own feet. One young friar grips his rosary so tightly that his knuckles whiten, for he feels the urge to sway, to step forward into the circle. His superior notices and scolds him with a glance, but the temptation lingers. The priests preach control, yet here before them is chaos dressed as joy, and it unsettles them more than any battlefield. The lords view it differently, though no less grimly. For them, the meadow is a mirror of danger. The peasants who till their fields, bake their bread, and owe their labour, now united in a force greater than any decree. A noble may silence a man with command or punishment, but he cannot silence 100 bodies moving as one, heedless of whip or sword. The festival reveals a power buried deep in the village, a power that could, if turned against him, overwhelm even a stone keep. He watches carefully, gauging the frenzy not merely with fear but with calculation. If it is left unchecked, could it become rebellion? If wine and rhythm can strip men of fear, what else might they dare? Yet he does not order the soldiers to disperse the crowd. He knows too well that no blade can cut through compulsion. To break the dance is to invite chaos sharper than any uprising. Between priests and lords hangs a silence as heavy as the smoke drifting from torches. Neither trusts the other. The priest sees the noble as worldly, too concerned with taxes and harvests to care for souls. The noble sees the priest as naive, imagining devils where there are only peasants drunk on wine. And yet, for all their differences, they are united in discomfort. Both are powerless before the meadow's frenzy. Their authority, which by daylight is unquestioned, falters in the night's grip. The villagers do not look toward them for permission. Their eyes are fixed on the firelight, the circle, the music. For one night, the hierarchy of the world has slipped, and the mighty can only stand and watch. You see it in the smallest gestures, a priest shifting uneasily when the dancers chant a refrain that sounds suspiciously like a pagan hymn, a steward adjusting the grip on his dagger, though no one has threatened him, a noblewoman drawing her cloak tightly, her face pale, though her eyes shine with something perilously close to longing, for even among the high-born, curiosity stirs. The meadow's frenzy may terrify, but it also tempts. Some nobles recall, in whispers, nights when they too abandoned rank and joined the circle, hidden by masks, indistinguishable from the peasants they ruled. Such memories are buried quickly, denied in daylight. But the meadow remembers. As the night stretches, the gap between watchers and dancers grows more fragile. The drums and pipes do not distinguish between serf and priest, lord and beggar. Their call is universal, stripping away titles and duties. A priest may scowl, but the rhythm still rattles his bones. A noble may sneer, but his pulse quickens with each stamp of feet. The meadow is no respecter of status. It demands surrender from all who stand within earshot. And so, the watchers shift uneasily, fearing not only what they see in the villagers but what they feel within themselves. In chronicles written long after, scribes would describe these scenes with the distance of ink on parchment. At night, the common folk danced until collapse, and priests condemned them as heretics, while lords feared riot. Yet no parchment can capture the tension of the moment, the weight of firelight on uneasy faces, the sharp contrast between still figures at the edge and writhing bodies at the center. To witness it is to feel the fragility of order, the thinness of the veil that separates obedience from abandon. And you realize, as you stand beside the priests and lords, that their fear is not misplaced. For if the frenzy can swallow so many peasants, why could it not swallow them as well? The meadow burns with music, the villagers dance as though eternity depends on their steps, and the priests and lords remain on the outside, powerless, watchful, uneasy. Their presence does not break the spell, nor does it offer salvation. They are as much captives of the night as the dancers, though their chains are invisible, chains of fear, of authority undermined, of temptation half acknowledged. They watch, and in their watching, they confess silently that even the highest walls of monastery and manor cannot keep out the call of drums and pipes in the darkness. The first collapses. The meadow, swollen with sound and movement, no longer feels like a place rooted in earth. It has become a storm, whirling and unending, and the people within it are both its fuel and its victims. The air is thick with heat from bodies pressed together, with the acrid smoke of torches and the sourness of sweat, with the sharp tang of herbs and wine. Hours have passed, how many, none can say. The drums do not stop, the pipes do not falter, and the dancers, driven far beyond reason, continue as though compelled by something greater than themselves. But even storms must break, and the first cracks in this living tempest come in the form of bodies giving way. At first it is a stumble barely noticed, quickly absorbed by the rhythm. A woman, her veil askew, sways too far to one side, falling into her neighbour. The circle shifts, catches her, and pushes her back upright. She laughs weakly, though her lips are pale, her eyes glassy, her body trembling as though every muscle screams. She resumes the steps, her feet moving almost without her will, but already you see that she is fading. Others soon follow. A boy trips, his knees bloodied against the stones hidden in the grass. Yet even as tears streak his face, he drags himself upright, driven by the beat that will not release him. His cries are swallowed by the shriek of pipes, his pain invisible to all but those standing close. Then the first true collapse comes. A man in his middle years, his tunic soaked dark with sweat, his face contorted with strain, suddenly buckles. His knees crash into the earth, his hands clawing at the ground as though to steady himself, but his legs continue to twitch, jerking, stamping, even as the rest of his body writhes. Those nearest to him try to lift him, but the moment they do, his feet resume the pattern, dragging him back into the circle until he slips from their grasp. His mouth opens in a wordless cry, half laughter, half agony, and then he drops again, foam flecking at the corners of his lips. The dancers do not stop, the music does not soften. Around him, the frenzy carries on, indifferent, as if the meadow itself refuses to acknowledge weakness. From that point, the collapses multiply. Women faint mid-spin, their bodies crumpling like discarded cloth, only to be trampled if companions do not drag them aside. Men stagger, clutching their chests, their faces purple with effort, before falling forward into the press of bodies. Some rise again, staggering, forced back into rhythm as though compelled by invisible strings. Others lie where they fall, their limbs still jerking in grotesque mimicry of dance, their eyes rolled back, their breathing ragged. The meadow becomes a battlefield of endurance, where the fallen are scattered like casualties, yet the war rages on without pause. Whispers ripple among those at the edge. Mothers clutch children tighter, fearing they may be pulled into the same fate. Priests murmur prayers more loudly now, their voices trembling as they see the spectacle turn from merriment into torment. Nobles frown, shifting uneasily, for they know that too many deaths among their peasants mean fewer hands to sow fields and harvest grain. Yet no one steps forward to stop it. The music does not allow interruption, and the dancers, whether still standing or collapsed, remain captives of the rhythm. To halt it would be to fight against the storm itself, and none dare risk being swept into the frenzy they fear. Some villagers insist that collapse is part of the ritual, that to fall and rise again proves endurance, even holiness. A woman shrieks through her exhaustion that she feels angels lifting her when her body fails, that Saint Vitus himself commands her feet to move. Others mutter darker things, that demons ride the fallen, jerking their limbs like puppets, laughing through foaming mouths. To the watchers, it is impossible to tell. The meadow is filled with writhing forms, some joyous, some suffering, some caught between laughter and tears, until all distinction blurs. What is sacred? What is cursed? In the frenzy, the line is erased. The most haunting are those who collapse but cannot stop moving. Their bodies lie prone, yet their legs kick. Their feet pound against the earth as though still inside the circle. Their eyes stare at nothing, their mouths froth, but their muscles do not rest. Companions attempt to hold them, to still their limbs, but it is like wrestling wild beasts. The rhythm inside them will not be silenced. Some are carried to the edges of the meadow, laid on cloaks, their families fanning their faces, pressing water to their lips. But even there, away from the circle, their feet twitch, their bodies jerk in grotesque parody of dance. It is as though the music has entered their very blood, continuing to play long after ears can no longer hear. And yet, for every collapse, more still leap into the circle. The frenzy does not weaken but grows stronger, as though each fall feeds its power. The meadow trembles beneath the stamping, the torches flare brighter with each surge of movement, and the river whispers with eddies stirred by vibrations of countless feet. The fallen lie scattered, their groans mingling with laughter, with cries, with song, until the air is a cacophony that drowns even the pipes. It is no longer a festival, it is possession, an ordeal in which every body is tested, and many fail. You stand at the edge, watching the first collapses ripple outward, and you realize that the festival is only just beginning. The true terror and the true mystery of these nights lies not in the joy of dancing, but in the point at which joy becomes torment, when celebration turns to compulsion, and when collapse itself cannot bring release. For in the meadow of endless steps, even the fallen continue to dance. The fear of possession. The meadow, alive with sound and motion, has now become something more than human. The first collapses have left bodies scattered along the grass, their legs twitching, their mouths frothing, their eyes staring blankly at the sky. Others stumble, exhausted, but still compelled to stamp their feet, as though invisible threads bind them to the rhythm. To those watching from the edges, priests whispering psalms, nobles clutching cloaks more tightly around their shoulders, the sight is not merely one of exhaustion. It is something darker, something that reaches beyond the flesh. For in these convulsions and cries, they do not see mere weariness, they see the unmistakable shadow of possession. The fear begins as a murmur, slipping from lip to lip, quick as wind through grass. The devil has them, a woman hisses, clutching her child to her breast. It is St. Vitus's curse, mutters an old man, shaking his head as though he had seen such things before. The priests, more emboldened now, lift their voices above the drums and pipes, crying that demons walk among the dancers, that every shriek is a spirit's laughter, every collapse the triumph of hell. They cross themselves furiously, raising crucifixes high, yet even as they speak their words, their eyes remain fixed on the circle with unease. For though they preach confidently, the sheer force of the frenzy unsettles them, gnawing at their certainty. You watch the villagers themselves begin to believe it. The dancers, once jubilant, now whirl with a strange desperation, as though aware of the whispers surrounding them. Some cry out to saints with each step, begging for protection even as their bodies refuse to halt. A young girl shrieks that she cannot stop, her voice cracking with terror, her arms flailing as if unseen hands push her onward. Her companions weep as they try to hold her, but her feet continue to stamp the ground in frantic rhythm, mocking their attempts at comfort. Such moments fuel the fear, confirming what all had half believed already, that these nights are not born of wine or joy alone, but of something that seizes the soul. The signs are undeniable to those steeped in superstition. A man collapses, his limbs jerking in spasms, his tongue lolling as though possessed. A woman's laughter turns guttural, unnatural, and the circle recoils as her body twists in grotesque arches. Children scream as they see neighbors, once familiar and kind, transformed into writhing shapes that resemble neither man nor beast. Some claim to hear voices beneath the music, whispers that speak in tongues they do not know. Others swear they see shadows moving where no torches burn, dark forms dancing at the edge of vision, never still, never human. The line between what is seen and what is feared blurs until the meadow itself feels haunted. Priests seize upon this fear, crying out that only holy intercession can break the spell. They urge the dancers to repent, to kneel, to turn their steps toward the church. But their words fall on deaf ears, drowned beneath the roar of pipes and drums, beneath the cries of those who can no longer control their own limbs. The dancers are beyond hearing, beyond reason, caught in a current that sweeps them away from mortal command. And so the priests turn their fury on the watchers, condemning them for tolerating such blasphemy, warning that the whole village risks damnation if the frenzy continues. Yet even they hesitate to enter the circle, for fear that one step too close will drag them into possession as well. The nobles, meanwhile, shift uneasily. They are less concerned with demons than with chaos, but possession offers a convenient explanation for what they cannot control. If the peasants are gripped by spirits, then their frenzy is not rebellion, but illness of the soul, a matter for priests rather than swords. And yet, as they glance at one another in the shadows, you sense their unease. For what ruler can govern a people who, at any moment, might be seized by forces unseen, their obedience dissolved in madness? It is one thing to command men by law and fear. It is another to face men who answer not to earthly lords but to rhythms and spirits beyond understanding. Among the villagers themselves, the fear deepens with every collapse. Mothers wail as their children jerk uncontrollably. Fathers curse through tears as their sons stagger in delirium. Some try to carry the fallen away, but even as they drag them to the meadow's edge, the bodies continue to convulse, legs kicking, arms thrashing as if dancing in dreams. To those who watch, it is proof that possession lingers, that spirits cling to flesh long after will has fled. They whisper of witches who might have cursed the village, of demons who lurk in herbs and wine, of saints angered by forgotten vows. The meadow is filled not only with music and cries, but with fear thick enough to choke. And yet, within the circle, the frenzy continues. Some dancers, perhaps too far gone, no longer care whether they are possessed or not. They laugh through tears, scream through smiles, their faces distorted with both ecstasy and agony. To them, possession may be terror, but it is also release, a surrender so complete that the self dissolves, leaving only motion. Others fight it, clutching rosaries, even as their feet betray them, mouthing prayers between sobs, as though to anchor themselves. But the dance is merciless, and possession, whether real or feared, spreads like fire through dry grass. You stand at the edge, watching villagers torn between fascination and horror, priests crying against demons, nobles fretting over order, and dancers collapsing in grotesque ecstasy. And you realize that what terrifies them most is not simply the thought of demons. It is the thought that their own neighbors, their own kin, could be overtaken so easily, transformed from familiar faces into strangers ruled by forces unseen. The meadow has revealed a truth too terrible to accept, that the human body is fragile, the human will weak, and that in the right moment, any soul might be possessed by demons, by saints, or by the rhythm of endless steps. Doctors with leech and laurel, as the meadow lies strewn with the fallen, their limbs twitching in grotesque mimicry of dance. Another set of figures emerges, men cloaked not in the vestments of priests or the cloaks of lords, but in the strange trappings of medieval medicine. They carry with them bags of instruments, bundles of herbs, and books filled with the wisdom and superstition of their age. Some wear long cloaks and gloves, others masks of cloth or leather meant to protect them from foul airs. Their arrival is greeted with a mixture of hope and fear, for the villagers do not know whether these physicians can save their loved ones or whether they merely bring more suffering disguised as cure. Yet in their desperation, they step aside, letting the doctors approach the convulsing forms scattered on cloaks and grass. The physicians kneel by the first of the fallen, a young man whose legs thrash uncontrollably while foam flecks his lips. They press his wrists, mutter observations, and then set to work with the tools they know best. A small blade is drawn, and with it they cut into his skin, placing leeches carefully upon the wound. The belief is simple. If madness and frenzy boil within the blood, then blood itself must be drawn out until balance is restored. The villagers gasp, whispering prayers, watching as the leeches swell with crimson, their slick bodies writhing in grotesque parody of the dancers themselves. The young man groans, his legs still jerking, his body still betraying him. The doctors nod gravely, insisting that the treatment will take time. Another physician offers a different cure. He produces a wreath of laurel leaves, fresh and pungent, and places it upon the head of a woman whose body arches in spasms, her eyes rolled back in terror. Laurel, he explains, wards off evil spirits and cools the fever of frenzy. The villagers murmur approval, for laurel is known to them from church and scripture, sacred to saints and martyrs. Yet when the wreath is set upon her brow, she shrieks, her hands clawing at the leaves as though they burn her. The physician holds firm, whispering prayers of healing, but the sight unsettles all who watch. Some whisper that the woman resists because the demon within her fears the holy plant. Others mutter darker things, that perhaps the laurel is no cure, but merely another torment. So the treatments continue, varied and uncertain. One doctor mixes a draught of vinegar and rosewater, pressing it to cracked lips, claiming it will cool the blood's heat. Another burns herbs, sage, rosemary, even wormwood, wafting the smoke over a group of the fallen, declaring that foul airs must be driven out. Some victims quiet for a moment, their breathing slowing, their limbs still. A hopeful murmur rises among the villagers, but then, as suddenly as silence fell, the bodies jerk again, renewed spasms tearing through them, as though the herbs only stirred the frenzy deeper. The crowd groans, their hopes dashed, yet they cling still to the doctors, for even false cures are better than none. The physicians themselves are divided. Some speak with confidence, declaring that the affliction is caused by humors unbalanced, too much blood, too much black bile, too much heat in the liver. They prescribe bleeding, purging, cooling baths. Others insist that it is not humors but spirits, invisible forces that creep into flesh through sin or air. They prescribe charms, laurel crowns, whispered prayers. Still others mutter that it is contagion, a sickness of the nerves that spreads by sight or sound. Their remedies are experimental, their certainty brittle. Yet in the meadow, beneath the eyes of villagers desperate for answers, they perform their arts with grave conviction. And you realize that for all their learning, for all their strange remedies, these doctors are no more certain than the peasants themselves. They bleed, they burn, they crown with laurel, but none can stop the twitching feet, the endless jerks of legs that dance even when the mind is lost. The villagers, once hopeful, begin to murmur again of demons, of curses, of saints angered by neglect. The priests seize upon this, denouncing the doctors as charlatans, declaring that no leech or herb can heal what only prayer may cure. The nobles frown, weighing cost and consequence, wondering whether such healers are worth their coin. Yet still, the doctors remain, for they too are compelled, not by drums and pipes, but by the mystery itself, by the chance to confront an illness that defies all reason. You watch as one physician, exhausted, kneels beside a child no older than 10, her small body quivering with spasms, her feet kicking helplessly in the dirt. He places laurel upon her brow, presses water to her lips, then clasps her hands in his, whispering words not of science but of comfort, for in that moment all his knowledge, all his remedies, seem useless, and he can only act as a man watching another suffer. Around him, the meadow rages on, the music unrelenting, the dancers spinning, the fallen writhing. And in his eyes you see the truth, that medicine in this age is as much prayer as it is practice, as much ritual as cure. The villagers cling to whatever hope they can. Some tie laurel around their own heads, believing it will protect them from joining the fallen. Others beg the doctors for herbs or draughts, clutching at cures they do not understand. The meadow becomes a strange theatre of treatment, where bleeding and chanting, wreathing and fumigating, all mingle with the endless rhythm of drums and pipes. It is both desperate and futile, a reminder that in the Middle Ages, the line between healing and superstition was as thin as parchment. And so, as the night stretches on, the doctors with their leeches and laurels remain in the shadows, tending the fallen, battling demons they cannot see and humors they cannot balance. Their presence does not halt the dance, nor does it end the frenzy, but it adds another layer to the strange mystery of the night, another attempt by humankind to wrest order from chaos, to name what will not be named, to heal what cannot be cured. The March of St. Vitus. The meadow is not silent, but within the roar of drums, the shriek of pipes, the groans of the fallen, and the sobs of families, another name begins to surface, whispered first, then spoken louder, until it becomes a refrain woven through the night. St. Vitus, St. Vitus, St. Vitus. It passes from lip to lip like a prayer, or perhaps like an incantation, half hope and half dread. For in this age, when the line between heaven and hell is drawn not in reason but in fear and faith, The villagers believe that what seizes their neighbors must belong to a power greater than themselves, and the name they give to that power is Vitus. Saint Vitus is not among the grandest of the saints. He is no Peter, no Paul, no Mary, revered in gilded chapels. He is a figure less known in cities, but in the villages, in the valleys of Germany and the towns along the Rhine, his name carries peculiar weight. For legend says he was a martyr, a youth who died steadfast in faith, and over the centuries his memory became entangled with strange tales of healing and affliction. To dance in frenzy, to writhe in uncontrollable fits, to convulse until collapse, these became known as the curse and the gift of Saint Vitus. Those who suffered were said to be claimed by him, punished or protected. None could say for certain. You hear the priests seize upon his name, weaving it into their cries. They shout that the meadow is proof of Saint Vitus's wrath, that the dancers are chastised for their sins, that only pilgrimage to his shrines can save them. Their voices grow hoarse as they tell of churches where relics of the saint are kept, bones, cloths, fragments of his story that promise healing if the afflicted can only reach them. Some in the crowd nod fervently, clutching crosses, swearing they will march at dawn, carrying their children, dragging their neighbors, even crawling if they must, to lay their burdens before Saint Vitus. The nobles, too, find advantage in the name. To call it madness or rebellion invites responsibility, demands action, but to call it street, Vitus's dance shifts the weight to heaven. It becomes not a matter of lordship but of pilgrimage, not a disorder of obedience, but a curse of sanctity. If the peasants march away to shrines, so much the better. Their absence will quiet the village, and their devotion will appease the priests. Thus, the lords speak the name with measured tones, encouraging pilgrimage while keeping themselves distant from both frenzy and cure. But it is the villagers who bear the deepest relationship to the saint. To them, he is not distant, not lofty. He is both protector and punisher, one who walks among them unseen. They tell stories of children who once danced for days until laid at Vitus's chapel, where they found peace at last. They speak of rivers crossed, of barefoot journeys through woods and towns, entire processions of afflicted men, women, and children marching together like armies of the broken, their bodies still twitching, their lips still murmuring, yet their eyes fixed on the hope of relief. In this way, the frenzy of the meadow does not end when the music fades. It spills outward, onto roads and fields, turning into processions that wind across Europe, all under the name of Saint Vitus. You imagine such a march, the dawn breaking, weary families lifting limp bodies from the ground, villagers still staggering as though half dancing even as they walk. Behind them trail priests chanting psalms, nobles men-at-arms ensuring order, and physicians clutching their bags of leeches and herbs. They move like pilgrims, though their pilgrimage is not chosen freely, but demanded by the strange compulsion in their limbs. Villagers from other towns watch them pass with awe and terror, whispering blessings or spitting curses, fearing the contagion of sight. To see a column of men and women twitching, stamping, groaning their way along the road is to feel the fragility of one's own body, to wonder whether one's own feet might betray them next. The cult of Vitus grows stronger with each such march. Shrines that once stood small become crowded, their altars heaped with offerings from desperate families. Candles burn day and night, illuminating reliquaries said to hold the saint's bones. Pilgrims kneel before them, pressing their foreheads to cold stone, praying for relief from the dance that has consumed their kin. Some rise miraculously calmed, their limbs still, their eyes clear. Others collapse again, their convulsions renewed even in the shadow of holy relics. But whether cured or not, all leave convinced that Saint Vitus holds the key, that he alone governs this strange torment. It is a curious paradox, for if the frenzy is his punishment, why then do so many find peace at his shrines? And if it is his gift, why does it bring such suffering? The villagers do not ask such questions too loudly, for faith in the Middle Ages thrives not on answers but on endurance. They live with the ambiguity, with the possibility that Vitus is both punisher and saviour, that his hand lifts and strikes in the same motion. And so they march, their steps compelled by the same rhythm that filled the meadow, but now channeled into pilgrimage, into devotion, into the endless roads that lead to shrines, where bones gleam faintly behind glass. As you watch the villagers whisper his name, as you imagine the long marches that follow these nights of frenzy, you realize that the story of St. Vitus is less about one man than about a need for meaning. In the face of possession, collapse, and death, the people cannot endure silence. They must name their tormentor. They must clothe their fear in the garb of sainthood. They must believe that suffering has a purpose and that relief lies somewhere on the road ahead. Without such belief, the madness of the meadow would consume not only their bodies but their souls. With it, they find strength to march, to endure, to hope. Thus the night festivals, though feared, become tied forever to St. Vitus. His name, spoken in whispers and cries, is etched into memory as the patron of dancers, the lord of the possessed, the guardian of those who writhe and fall. And long after the meadow is quiet, long after the torches burn to ash and the music fades, his shadow remains, leading the afflicted onward, step by step, in the endless march of devotion and despair. The spread through Europe. The meadow was never an isolated place, never a secret kept only by one village. What begins in a single field, by a single river, soon ripples outward, carried on the lips of travellers, chroniclers, and pilgrims who pass from town to town. The story of the frenzy does not remain bound to one valley. It spreads, seeping into the very fabric of Europe, until it becomes a phenomenon no region can ignore. To follow its course is to trace a map of fear, devotion, and astonishment, a pattern woven across centuries. It is in the Rhineland, first, that the chronicles speak with urgency. In towns such as Strasbourg and Aachen, along the winding banks of the Rhine, villagers are seized in waves of uncontrollable dance. Entire squares fill with men and women stamping their feet until the cobblestones are slick with sweat. Chroniclers record that in the heat of summer, hundreds at a time are overcome, some collapsing in delirium, others carried to shrines of saints. The city elders attempt to impose order, posting guards, forbidding gatherings, but their efforts are in vain, for the frenzy is not born of law, nor can it be quelled by decree. It comes unbidden, like the river floods, sweeping away all resolve. From there, the tales spread southward into the valleys of Switzerland and eastward into the German principalities. In Basel, in Zurich, in Cologne, the same reports echo, men and women abandoning their tasks to stamp and whirl in streets, their steps uncontrollable, their cries echoing against stone walls. Priests rail from pulpits that demons walk among them, while physicians argue over humours and contagion. Merchants shake their heads, lamenting lost trade, for who will buy cloth or grain when entire marketplaces erupt into madness? Yet despite the condemnation, despite the fear, the phenomenon persists, moving like a shadow from town to town. By the late Middle Ages, France too feels its weight. In Metz and Toulouse, in the countryside of Burgundy, rumours take root. There, the villagers speak of cursed music drifting from forests, of phantom minstrels luring children into circles of frenzy. Chroniclers, writing with ink smudged by trembling hands, describe processions of the afflicted moving from parish to parish, seeking relief at the chapels of saints. French lords, no less wary than their German counterparts, watch with unease as their peasants, normally bound to soil and plough, abandon fields to join processions that stretch for miles. The sight of hundreds swaying and twitching in unison along the road is not easily forgotten. Nor does Italy remain untouched. In the fertile plains near the Po, in towns like Modena and Milan, reports echo of dancers overcome by strange compulsions. There, the phenomenon merges with local beliefs about the tarantula, a spider whose bite was said to induce madness. Villagers claim that only frenzied dancing to music can draw out its poison. Thus, Italian physicians, fiddlers, and townsfolk alike adopt the frenzy as cure, prescribing music and motion as medicine. What elsewhere is seen as curse becomes in Italy both affliction and remedy. The same rhythm that terrifies priests in Germany is in Apulia, played with deliberate intent. Fiddlers summoned to coax poison from the veins of the afflicted. And so, across the Alps, the madness is given yet another name, yet another meaning, yet another way to survive. The reach is not merely geographic but cultural. Pilgrims carry tales into Spain, into the Low Countries, even into the distant reaches of Scandinavia. Everywhere, the same pattern emerges: sudden compulsion, relentless movement, collapse, fear of possession, and cries to the saints. In some regions, Saint Vitus reigns supreme. In others, local spirits or saints are invoked, but the essence remains the same: people caught in a force larger than themselves, their steps echoing across Europe as though the very continent were bound in invisible chains of rhythm. The chronicles do not always agree on numbers or causes. Some claim dozens afflicted, others hundreds, even thousands. Some insist it spreads like plague, passed from body to body through sight and sound. Others argue it is mass delusion, fear feeding upon itself until the body betrays the mind. Yet the stories are too many, too widespread, to dismiss entirely. The dance mania becomes one of the defining mysteries of medieval life. Recorded in Latin manuscripts, whispered in village taverns, preached about in cathedrals, Europe itself becomes the meadow, the frenzy its uninvited guest, and with the spread comes reputation. Foreign visitors write of it with awe, carrying tales back to their own lands. Minstrels compose ballads about the dancers who whirled until death, their songs both warning and entertainment. Merchants incorporate it into their gossip, warning of towns best avoided, lest one fall prey to the curse. Even artists, in their manuscripts and paintings, sketch crude images of men and women contorted in grotesque positions, their limbs jerking, their faces twisted in laughter or pain. The image of the frenzy becomes etched into the imagination of an entire continent. You realize, standing in this broader view, that the night festivals of the Middle Ages are not merely the secret of one village by one river. They are the echo of a continent searching for meaning amid famine, plague, and war. They are the embodiment of fear and longing, of joy and torment, all tangled together in steps that never seem to cease. What began as whispers in a meadow grows into a chorus heard across kingdoms, from the cathedrals of France to the marketplaces of Italy, from the forests of Germany to the fields of Switzerland. And as Europe watches itself caught in this strange contagion of movement, the name of Saint Vitus grows ever louder, entwined with the legend. The dance becomes not merely madness, but history, carried in stories across borders, embedded in memory as one of the strangest afflictions of the age. For centuries to come, scholars and chroniclers would puzzle over its cause, but in its own time, the people knew only its power that spread across Europe like fire, leaving both fascination and fear in its wake. The sound of invisible pipes. As the frenzy spreads across Europe, the chronicles begin to repeat a detail that is more unsettling than any collapse or convulsion. It is not always the visible musicians, the drummers, the fiddlers, the pipers with cheeks puffed red and fingers flying that compel the dancers. Sometimes, the villagers insist, the music comes from nowhere at all. They swear they hear melodies drifting through the air when no instrument is seen, thin and high as wind whistling through reeds, yet patterned too carefully to be mere noise. These are the invisible pipes, notes carried on the night air like a spell, coaxing feet to move and refusing to release them. The stories come first from the Rhineland, where townspeople recount how dancers claimed they followed a tune no minstrel played. Men heard it in their sleep, jolting upright as though pulled from bed, and rushed outside to stamp and whirl until dawn. Women swore the music came from hillsides or rivers, where no musician stood, where only the wind or water could have produced sound, yet the rhythm was unmistakable, deliberate, unrelenting. Children, half dreaming, described phantom flutes, whose melodies burrowed into their bones, making them laugh and cry at once. The witnesses are adamant. The music is not imagined, but real, though no earthly player can be found. You imagine the terror of such moments, the meadow quiet, the torches guttering low, the last fiddler too weary to lift his bow, and yet the dancers keep moving, stamping in perfect rhythm to a tune unheard by any outsider. The watchers grow pale, whispering that devils play the pipes, that spirits of the dead summon the dance. Priests seize upon the tale, declaring that Satan himself sends music into the ears of sinners, mocking the hymns of angels with shrill and ceaseless noise. But even as they condemn it, some priests admit quietly, fearfully, that they too heard the faint strains, that they felt their own feet twitching, their own hearts beating in time. The villagers give the phantom music many names. Some call it the devil's melody, a song carried from hell to snare the unwary. Others whisper of fairies or wild men of the woods, ancient spirits who lure mortals into circles until they collapse, drained of life. A few even call it the voice of Saint Vitus, punishing those who forgot his feast or ignored his relics. The interpretations differ, but the effect remains. Once the invisible pipes begin, the dancers cannot stop. They move long after the visible musicians falter, long after exhaustion makes them weep. The phantom tune is inexhaustible, tireless, cruel. Physicians, in their attempts at reason, offer their own explanations. They write that the afflicted hear the music only in their minds, their sickness producing hallucinations as vivid as any melody. The rhythm, they argue, comes not from air but from within the body itself, the pulse pounding in the veins, the blood roaring in the ears, the nerves firing in patterns mistaken for song. And yet, when whole groups sway in unison to a phantom melody, when dozens move as though led by the same invisible flute, the explanation falters. Can the mind of one man deceive him? Certainly. But can the minds of 100 conjure the same tune, step in the same pattern, fall into the same collapse? Such questions leave physicians silent. The villagers, less burdened by philosophy, simply accept the mystery. They know the music is real, for they have felt it. They describe it with trembling voices, a thin, piercing sound like glass struck in darkness, or a deep drone like bees in a hive, or a twisting melody that changes from joy to despair in a single note. Some say it is beautiful beyond words, sweeter than any song sung by mortal lips, while others insist it is hideous, shrill, a torment that claws at the skull. The contradiction matters little, for beautiful or ugly, it compels the same result: endless motion. And so the fear of invisible pipes becomes woven into the lore of the frenzy. When a child hums a tune absent-mindedly, elders hush them, fearful it may call the phantom music closer. When the wind whistles through chimneys at night, families cross themselves, whispering prayers lest it awaken their feet. Travellers passing lonely valleys avoid whistling, for to mimic the sound of flutes is to risk summoning the dance. Even silence becomes dangerous, for at any moment a phantom note may pierce it, and once heard, it cannot be ignored. In the Chronicles of Metz, one priest writes of standing on the steps of his church at dawn, watching a group of 30 peasants sway and stamp, though no music played. Their faces were slack with exhaustion, their eyes glazed, yet their steps fell in unison as though guided by a flute no one else could hear. He swore that when he strained his ears, he caught it faintly, a reedy, distant piping that seemed to come from beneath the earth itself. He fled inside, ringing the bells in desperation, hoping to drown the sound. But when he returned, the peasants still danced, their bodies jerking with unnatural rhythm. Only when they collapsed, silent and still, did the phantom pipes cease. To the villagers, this tale confirms what they already fear. The invisible music is not bound to meadow or musician. It is everywhere, lurking in silence, waiting to strike. The frenzy is not just an event, but a haunting, a tune that echoes beneath the surface of daily life. Farmers bending over fields fear that the rustling of wheat hides its strains. Women at looms wonder if the clatter of shuttles conceals its rhythm. Even the monks, chanting in their cloisters, sometimes falter, unnerved by the thought that another song darker, invisible, might rise beneath their hymns. And you realize, standing in the shadow of these tales, that the most terrifying part of the frenzy is not the visible collapse, not the masks, nor the herbs, nor even the cries of possession. It is the sound that cannot be seen, the music that belongs to no mortal hands. For as long as the dancers follow musicians, the madness can be explained: wine, herbs, exhaustion, folly. But when they follow pipes no one plays, when they whirl to a melody that only they can hear, then the dance becomes something greater, something unearthly, something that strips away the comfort of reason. The sound of invisible pipes lingers, even when the meadow grows still. It remains in memory, in fear, in silence. For once a villager has heard it, they know that at any moment, in any place, the thin, relentless piping may return, and when it does, their feet will betray them again, leading them back into the endless circle from which there is no escape. The children among the dancers. It is in the faces of the youngest that the strangeness of the frenzy becomes most unbearable to watch. The meadow, already heavy with the scent of sweat and herbs, filled with cries of exhaustion and shouts of praise or fear, also holds within its circle the smallest of feet. The children are not spared. They are drawn in just as powerfully as their parents, pulled by the same invisible melody, their laughter transforming into screams, their play collapsing into agony. Some arrive at the dance in innocence, holding their mothers' hands, chasing one another with the giddy excitement of a holiday. At first, they imitate what they see, stamping clumsily in time, spinning with the carelessness of youth. But as the hours pass, imitation becomes compulsion. The joy in their eyes dulls, replaced by the glassy stare seen already in the adults, and their little bodies move with a precision that is not their own. You notice it most when the first collapses among the children begin. A boy of 7 tumbles to the ground, his small legs jerking as though strings tug them from above. His cries are shrill, high-pitched, cutting through the music more piercingly than the pipes. His mother screams and throws herself down beside him, trying to lift him, but his limbs thrash violently, and she can do nothing but cradle him while his feet still kick in rhythm. Around them, the circle tightens, then spins away again, as though unable to stop for even a moment's compassion. The dance swallows pity as quickly as it swallows strength. Another child, a girl with braids and flushed cheeks, begins to giggle as she spins. At first her laughter delights those nearby, lifting spirits for a moment, as if innocence can soften the horror. But the giggle sharpens, rising into manic peals that do not stop. She spins faster, her braids whipping across her face, until suddenly she staggers, her eyes wide with terror. The giggle becomes a scream, but still her feet stamp, faster and faster, as though she is being dragged by invisible hands. When she collapses, the cry continues, rising thin and desperate, until she is dragged away and laid among the other fallen. Her small chest heaves, her eyes roll, her lips move in whispered fragments of a prayer she cannot finish. The sight of children in the frenzy unsettles even the hardest of hearts. Priests falter in their condemnations, their voices cracking as they see the innocence of youth writhing in the grass. Nobles pale, for though they may dismiss peasants' suffering as weakness, the image of children overtaken suggests a force that respects no rank or age. Mothers weep openly, torn between their instinct to shield their little ones and the knowledge that the music cannot be resisted. Fathers gnash their teeth, cursing demons, saints, and fate alike, helpless to stop their children from being pulled into the whirl. Chroniclers would later write that children were among the most vulnerable to St. Vitus's curse. Some argued that their bodies, unformed and delicate, lacked the strength to resist. Others claimed that their innocence made them easy vessels for spirits, unable to shield themselves with sign-forged resistance. Villagers, less concerned with explanation, whispered that the frenzy was contagious, passed by sight and sound, and that once a child watched the circle too long, their feet were doomed to follow. They warned their young to look away, to cover their eyes and ears when the music began, but still, one by one, the children joined, unable to resist the tide. The fear of children dancing to collapse gave rise to new rituals. In some towns, families desperate to protect their little ones brought them to shrines before festivals, placing laurel crowns upon their heads or pressing relics into their hands. In others, children were kept indoors under watch of elders, their windows shuttered and doors barred, while the rest of the village surrendered to frenzy. Yet even these measures sometimes failed. There are tales of children breaking free in the night, running barefoot through streets to join the circle, as though drawn by strings too strong to sever. And there are darker stories still of families discovering their children already moving in their sleep, stamping and twitching, as if to music only they could hear. The presence of children changes the meadow itself. Their shrill cries mingle with the groans of adults, their small bodies collapsing among the tall. They are carried to the edges, laid in rows with others, but their voices continue, pleading in tones too fragile to bear. The priests, their condemnation softened, begin to speak instead of deliverance, urging families to march the afflicted children to the shrines of Vitus. The nobles, too, step back from threats of punishment, for to condemn the frenzy when children suffer is to risk appearing monstrous. In this way, the little ones alter the entire dynamic of the festival, turning it from madness to tragedy, from riot to pilgrimage. And yet, amid the horror, there are moments of strange beauty, a line of children holding hands, spinning together in unison, their feet stamping in perfect rhythm, their voices raised in a chant half song, half prayer. Their faces glow in torchlight, at once joyous and mournful, as if caught between worlds. For a heartbeat, you glimpse the possibility that this is not entirely curse, but something older, some ancient ritual echoing through their fragile forms. Perhaps the children carry within them the memory of forgotten gods who once demanded dancing tribute from mortals. Perhaps the frenzy is not punishment at all, but inheritance, passing strongest through the youngest. Whatever the truth, the sight of children among the dancers ensures that no one can dismiss the frenzy as mere folly. It is not only wine-drunk peasants or foolish youths who fall, it is the innocent, the unformed, the future of the village itself. Their small feet pound the same earth, their voices cry the same cries, their bodies collapse in the same convulsions, and in their suffering, the villagers see the depth of the mystery, the breadth of its reach. No one is safe, not the aged, not the strong, not even the smallest child. And as the night wanes, as torches burn lower and parents clutch their limp children in trembling arms, you understand why the chronicles linger so long on this detail, for nothing haunts the memory more than the sound of children laughing as they dance, and the silence that follows when they fall. When the nobles joined, at the edge of the meadow, where priests mutter prayers and stewards watch with folded arms, there are times when curiosity, or perhaps something deeper, proves too strong. For though nobles are accustomed to viewing themselves as apart from the common folk, beyond their fears and follies, the frenzy does not respect the lines of rank. On certain nights, the very men and women who rule by daylight find themselves drawn into the circle, their silk and velvet brushing against the coarse wool of peasants, their jewelled fingers clasping the calloused hands of serfs. And in that strange mingling, a world built upon hierarchy is, for a few wild hours, undone. At first it happens rarely, almost by accident. A young lord rides down to the meadow, out of amusement, eager to mock the peasants' folly. He laughs with his companions as they watch the villagers spin themselves into collapse. But then, as the drums pound louder, his smile falters. His foot begins to tap, his shoulders to sway, and before his friends can restrain him, he dismounts and strides forward into the circle. The peasants, startled, hesitate, but the music allows no pause. Soon they are whirling beside him, astonished to see their master stamping the earth with the same abandon as themselves. By dawn, he collapses like the rest, his fine tunic torn, his hair matted with sweat, indistinguishable from the poorest shepherd lying beside him. Word of such nights spreads quickly, whispered with awe. For in the Middle Ages, when lords dined at high tables and peasants crouched on dirt floors, when punishments fell swift on any who blurred the lines of order, to see nobles dancing with peasants is unthinkable, yet the frenzy makes it possible. Masks and torches conceal faces, sweat erases pride, and the rhythm demands equality. In the circle, there is no steward or servant, no knight or ploughman, only bodies moving, stamping, collapsing. There are chronicles that describe entire noble households caught in the madness. In Strasbourg, it is said, the daughter of a wealthy merchant, richly dressed for a feast, abandoned her father's hall to join the dancers in the street. She spun until dawn, her gown torn, her jewels lost in the dust, and when she collapsed, her father found her with peasants lying across her skirts. He tried to deny it, to hush the tale, but the city remembered. In Aachen, a knight returned from campaign found his own wife among the afflicted, her veil torn, her feet blistered, her lips moving in frantic prayer as she stamped beside farmers. He raged at priests, at neighbours, at heaven itself, but in the end, he too was said to have joined the circle, drawn in by the same force. The priests find such mingling intolerable, for it strikes at the very heart of their order. They preach that God assigns each man his place, that humility and obedience are virtues, that pride is punished and hierarchy ordained. Yet here, in the frenzy, lords and peasants alike fall, their bodies indistinguishable in collapse. Priests thunder against it, calling it the devil's parody of equality, a mockery of divine order. But their anger cannot undo the vision. For a night, power bends, and all are the same in exhaustion. For the nobles themselves, the experience is unsettling. Some resist with all their might, refusing to step forward, clutching their cloaks while their hearts beat to the drums. Others, when finally drawn in, describe it afterward with shame or with a strange, unspoken longing. To be freed from the constant burden of rank, to lose oneself among the nameless throng, to stamp the earth without thought of duty or pride, this is both terrifying and liberating. A lord may fear that his authority is mocked, yet he may also remember the thrill of surrender. A lady may blush to recall peasants' hands clasped in hers, yet in secret she may remember the warmth of it, the equality it promised for one forbidden night. You can almost see the torches glinting on their jewels, the fine fabrics darkened with sweat, the delicate shoes torn against stones. A nobleman, who by day rides armoured through his lands, now stumbles in delirium beside a stable boy. A lady, who commands servants with a word, now clings to the arm of a milkmaid, both of them laughing and crying as their feet betray them. In these moments, the meadow becomes something no court, no council, no church could allow, a place where power dissolves into rhythm, and the high and low are one. Of course, dawn restores the hierarchy. Nobles, ashamed or fearful, retreat behind stone walls. Their stewards hush the peasants, punishing those who dare to boast of their master's collapse. Priests warn from pulpits that such equality is blasphemy, not blessing. Yet memory lingers. The peasants, though cowed by daylight, remember the night when their lord fell beside them in the dirt, writhing to the same invisible music. And the nobles, though silent, carry their own memory of release, of freedom too dangerous to name. Thus the frenzy proves itself not only torment but revelation. It reveals how fragile the walls of rank truly are, how thin the veil that separates ruler from ruled. When the music rises, when the pipes shriek and the drums thunder, when the steps become endless, even nobles cannot resist. They too are human, and in the meadow, under the stars, they too dance until collapse. Markets turn to madness. It does not always begin in meadows by riversides. Sometimes the frenzy strikes at the very heart of towns, where order and trade are meant to govern the rhythm of life. The marketplace, that great stage of medieval existence, with its rows of stalls and booths, its cries of merchants hawking cloth and cheese, spices and grain, becomes on certain days the sight of chaos no less terrible than the midnight fields. What should be the hum of barter and the clang of coin is drowned instead by drums, by shouts, by the sudden stamping of feet. The very place where wealth is exchanged, where lords collect their dues and priests pass among the crowd to bless alms, is seized by the madness of dance. You can picture it, the square alive with noise, carts rolling over cobblestones, chickens flapping from baskets, children tugging at skirts. A fiddler plays a tune for coins tossed into his cap, nothing more than a light diversion for passers-by. Yet someone begins to move in earnest, first a boy, then a woman, then another, feet stamping, arms flailing, until the crowd begins to thin around them. What seemed harmless at first grows larger, the circle widening, merchants shouting in alarm as their stalls are overrun. A barrel of wine tips, spilling across the square, its red stain mixing with the dust. Loaves of bread fall to the ground, forgotten, trampled beneath frantic feet. The market becomes a place not of exchange but of frenzy, where coin and goods are abandoned in the face of rhythm that demands everything. Merchants, usually the most pragmatic of men, find themselves undone. Some try to hold on to their wares, clutching at bolts of cloth or sacks of flour, but their arms weaken as their feet betray them. A trader who moments ago haggled shrewdly now stamps his feet until his scales lie broken at his side. A woman selling herbs joins the circle with sudden abandon, her carefully arranged bundles scattering across the stones. Even the animals seem to sense the chaos. Oxen bellow, horses rear, chickens scatter with shrill cries as if fearing the same compulsion. The marketplace, symbol of stability and livelihood, becomes instead a whirlpool of motion, spinning out of control. Chroniclers recall such incidents with horror, for they leave not only spiritual scars but economic ruin, a day's trade lost, debts unpaid, goods destroyed, all because music, real or phantom, seized the people at once. Some towns attempt to prevent recurrence, forbidding musicians from playing in squares, posting guards with whips to disperse gatherings. But such measures are vain, for the frenzy, when it comes, needs no minstrel, no herald. It arrives unbidden, ignited by a single note, a single step, and suddenly 100 bodies are caught in its fire. No decree can stop it, no guard can strike fast enough. What is spilled or broken is left to the dust. The priests preach even more fiercely when markets are seized. In the meadow, they may condemn the frenzy as madness or sin, but in the square, before the steps of churches, and in the shadow of relics, they see it as open mockery of heaven. To stamp and writhe where alms are given, where sermons are preached, is to bring disorder into God's house itself. They thunder against it, calling down curses on those who dare to dance in holy places. Yet even their cries cannot halt the madness when it arrives. They are left to gather the fallen, to anoint the dying, to bless the bodies carried away once the frenzy collapses into silence. The nobles, too, are shaken, for the marketplace is not only a place of trade but a symbol of authority, where taxes are collected and justice declared. To see it overrun by peasants stamping in madness, their wares destroyed, their goods forgotten, is to glimpse the fragility of rule. A square that should echo with law instead echoes with chaos. A bailiff may stride forward with threats, but his voice is drowned by shrieks and song. Soldiers may push into the crowd, but some are caught themselves, their feet betraying them before their swords can rise. Authority is mocked not by rebellion but by rhythm, not by banners but by bodies overcome. And yet, amid the ruin, the strange equality seen in meadows appears again. Merchants and buyers, nobles, men and beggars, all are seized alike. A wealthy trader's purse of silver spills across the stones, but no one bends to gather it. Their feet pound in unison instead. A baker and a knight crash into one another, both drenched in sweat, both collapsing at last beside the same gutter. In that grotesque unity, order dissolves. The market, which by daylight separates rich from poor through price and power, becomes at night a place where all are bound in the same collapse. When dawn comes, the damage is clear. Stalls lie broken, barrels shattered, coins scattered and lost. Merchants sit slumped beside ruined goods, their faces as pale as those of the dancers sprawled in exhaustion. Priests scold and nobles demand recompense, but the villagers only shake their heads. What was lost is lost. No one remembers clearly how it began, only that once it started, it could not be stopped. The frenzy left its mark not only on the bodies of those who danced, but on the very heart of the town. And so the chronicles tell of markets turned to madness, of days when trade gave way to chaos, when order dissolved beneath invisible music. They tell of coins that lay untouched in dust, of bread ground beneath stamping feet, of voices raised not in barter but in cries of ecstasy and pain. For in those moments, the marketplace ceased to belong to lords, priests, or merchants. It belonged only to the dance, and to the merciless rhythm that left no wares unscathed, no purse secure, no soul untouched. The cures of silence. By now, the meadow, the marketplace, the very roads of Europe seem haunted by the rhythm that will not let go, and the villagers, priests, and physicians alike have tried every remedy they can imagine: wine, herbs, laurel, bleeding, relics, and pilgrimage. Yet for all these efforts, the dancers continue to whirl until their bodies break. Out of this desperation grows a new conviction, that perhaps the only true cure is not more music, not more frenzy, not even prayer shouted over the din, but silence. A silence so deep and encompassing that it swallows the phantom pipes, silences the drums, stills the voices, and leaves only the quiet in which body and soul might finally rest. The first attempts are simple. A priest, horrified at the chaos in his parish, orders that no music be played within the town walls. Minstrels are banished, instruments confiscated, bells muted. For a time, the silence is complete. Families speak in hushed tones, afraid that even laughter may awaken the compulsion. Yet even here, the dancers are not freed. In the stillness of the night, villagers claim to hear the phantom music more clearly than ever, rising from within themselves, from their very blood and bones. And when one begins to stamp a foot, the silence shatters, replaced once more by frenzy. Other communities attempt harsher remedies. In Basel, it is recorded, the afflicted were led not into meadows or churches, but into secluded rooms where all sound was forbidden. Their ears were covered with cloth, their eyes bound, their bodies restrained upon benches. Families prayed that in the suffocating darkness and silence, the frenzy would wither. Some did find calm, their limbs slowing, their breath steadying, as though cut off from the world that fed their madness. But others screamed, thrashing harder against bonds, claiming they heard the phantom music louder than ever. For silence, too, can become a kind of stage on which the imagination plays without restraint. And yet, for all its failures, the idea of silence clings stubbornly in the minds of both priests and healers. Perhaps it is because silence, in the Middle Ages, is already a symbol of holiness. Monks keep it in cloisters, broken only by prayer. Hermits dwell in caves where silence is their closest companion. If frenzy is noise, chaos, and motion, then silence is its opposite order, calm and peace. To cure the dance, then, must mean to wrap it in silence, to smother its rhythm until the soul is freed. Villages begin to experiment, not only with enforced quiet, but with rituals of silence. Days of fasting where no one speaks, vigils held without chant, nights spent in hushed contemplation. Some believe these acts shield them, others that they purge the spirit of rhythm. Whether they succeed is doubtful, but they offer hope, and in hope lies endurance. There are tales of groups of afflicted marched to remote chapels, perched high on mountain slopes, where no sound but wind and birds could reach them. The climb itself, grueling and steep, exhausts them, and once within the stone walls, priests order them to kneel in silence for hours, days, even weeks. Some return cured, their limbs steady, their eyes clear, their families praising the power of silence and solitude. Others return still twitching, still stamping, but slower now, as if the mountain's silence had dulled the compulsion, though not erased it. And some never return at all, their bodies buried in the quiet earth of those lonely chapels, where silence became their final cure. The people learn to weave silence into their own households. Mothers hush their children sternly when they begin to hum or tap. Fathers forbid singing at night, fearful of attracting the phantom pipes. Even laughter at feasts is checked, subdued, for too much noise is thought to invite frenzy. Silence becomes both shield and burden, a way of life adopted reluctantly by communities desperate to avoid another night of collapse. And yet, for all their care, the rhythm still returns, sometimes in the quietest moments, proof, perhaps, that silence is not strong enough to defeat what dwells within. You notice something else in these tales. Silence is never pure. In trying to force it, the villagers discover how difficult it is to quiet the world. A dog barks in the distance, a cartwheel groans, a child coughs, and fear ripples through the room, for each sound might awaken the steps. Some believe the very act of listening for silence makes them hear more keenly the phantom music hidden beneath. In this way, silence becomes not only cure but torment, a mirror held to the ear, amplifying what one dreads most. And still, the chronicles record moments where silence does seem to work. In Strasbourg, one family leads their afflicted daughter into the woods, far from roads and farms, where no sound but rustling leaves surrounds them. They keep her there for 3 days, speaking not a word, tending her only with food and water. On the 3rd day, she emerges calm, her limbs steady, her eyes clear. She lives for years afterward without relapse. Was it silence, fasting, solitude? No one can say. But the story spreads, and soon others attempt the same, clinging to the possibility that silence can free what music enslaves. To you, as an outsider watching through the centuries, there is something profoundly human in this search for silence. The villagers, faced with chaos, turn to its opposite, hoping to find salvation where all else has failed. They cannot control the drums, the pipes, the phantom melodies, but perhaps they can control themselves, their voices, their breath, their world. And in that attempt, whether it succeeds or fails, lies the deep desire to reclaim agency, to prove that not all is lost to frenzy. The cures of silence are fragile, imperfect, fleeting, yet they remain a testament to the hope of a people caught in madness. For in the endless night of stamping feet, convulsing limbs, and shrieking pipes, the promise of silence, even if only for a heartbeat, becomes a balm worth chasing. And so families hush their homes, priests guide their flocks into still chapels, and villages hold their breath together, praying that in the absence of sound, the curse might at last be broken. The slow fading of the festivals. The centuries move forward, and though the frenzy seems eternal in memory, it begins, slowly, to lose its grip upon the living world. The night festivals that once shook meadows, marketplaces, and towns with unrelenting rhythm begin to thin, their echoes fading like the last notes of a song carried away by the wind. It is not sudden, not a clean break, but a gradual withering, as if the very soil that once nourished such madness grows less fertile for it. And yet, in its passing, the frenzy leaves behind as many questions as it once raised, its mystery persisting even as its force wanes. The reasons for its fading are as tangled as the roots of old oaks. Some point to the slow tightening grip of the church, which, after centuries of ambivalence, grows more forceful in its condemnation. Bishops issue stricter edicts. Priests denounce the dances not only as sinful but as heretical, demanding greater penance from those who partake. Pilgrimages to shrines of Vitus, once seen as hope, are now framed as burdensome acts of atonement. What was once tolerated in silence or fear is now smothered under threat. Yet even the priests cannot fully explain why the compulsion itself seems weaker, why the invisible pipes are heard less often, why the bodies collapse less frequently in frenzy. Others point to the changes in Europe itself. The late Middle Ages grow harsher, bleaker. The plague that swept through towns and villages, the endless wars that scar the land, the famines that strip larders bare, these weigh upon the people with a heaviness that leaves little space for ecstatic abandon. Where once the dance was an eruption of release, a channel for despair and longing, now the despair is too great, too constant. The people are exhausted before they even step into the meadow. They endure life with quiet resignation, too beaten by hunger and grief to give themselves fully to frenzy. Perhaps it is not so much that the madness ends as that life itself becomes frenzy enough. And yet, remnants persist. In Strasbourg, in Cologne, in Basel, reports still surface of smaller gatherings, of groups who stamp and whirl for nights at a time, but they are fewer, more contained, less consuming. Physicians note them in the margins of their treatises, calling them curiosities rather than crises. Priests still mutter against them, but their voices no longer tremble with the same urgency. Nobles, too, cease to fear them as rebellion, seeing them instead as odd spectacles that pass without consequence. The frenzy is no longer an enemy of order, but a strange relic, a shadow of something greater that once was. The change is also cultural. Europe begins to turn its gaze toward new horizons, toward commerce that stretches beyond seas, toward knowledge reawakened from ancient texts, toward reformations of faith that shake the very core of belief. In this shifting world, the meadows and their frenzied dances seem increasingly archaic, belonging to a past age when saints and demons were the only explanations. The people still believe in such forces, but the dance no longer holds the same central terror. It becomes instead a tale to tell, a warning to children, a curiosity whispered beside hearths. The phantom pipes are remembered, but fewer claim to hear them, and yet the memory is not without ache. Those who lived through it remember too vividly to dismiss it as superstition. Old men recall with trembling voices the nights when entire villages collapsed, when children screamed and nobles stamped beside peasants. Women recall carrying limp bodies from meadows, hearing their feet twitch even in sleep. Priests remember the futility of their prayers, the way their crucifixes seemed powerless against invisible melodies. These memories linger long after the frenzy itself wanes, seared into generations as scars upon memory. You can sense how the fading of the festivals feels to the villagers themselves. For some, it is relief, an end to terror, a deliverance from the fear that any night might bring collapse. For others, strangely, it is loss. The frenzy was not only torment but release, a chance to abandon the self, to shed the burdens of toil, rank, and sin. Its fading leaves behind a silence heavier than the cures once promised. Those who lived for the exhilaration of wild motion, for the laughter turned to sobs, for the equality born in sweat and collapse, now face only the endless drudgery of daylight life. The madness was curse, but it was also fire. Without it, the world feels colder, dimmer, more ordinary. As the Middle Ages give way to new centuries, the frenzy does not disappear entirely, but it changes shape. In Italy, the tarantella endures, its wild rhythms echoing the same compulsions once blamed on spiders rather than saints. In Germany, the name of Saint Vitus remains tied to twitching limbs and involuntary motion, though physicians begin to classify it as illness rather than curse. The dances no longer sweep entire towns, but isolated individuals still twitch, still stamp, still convulse, their neighbors recalling the old tales as they watch. The great festivals have ended, but the shadow lingers in bodies and in memory. And so, the night festivals of the Middle Ages fade, not with a final collapse, but with a long, slow exhale. The meadows grow quiet, the marketplaces return to trade, the shrines of Vitus collect dust instead of endless pilgrims. Yet the stories remain, woven into chronicles, painted in manuscripts, whispered in cottages. For centuries afterward, the people would remember, half in awe and half in dread, the time when music ruled bodies, when invisible pipes compelled feet, when peasants and nobles alike surrendered to frenzy. The fading of the festivals is not the end of the story but its transformation. What was once lived becomes legend, what was once feared becomes folklore. What was once curse becomes curiosity. But in the stillness that follows, the echo remains, faint but insistent, like the memory of a rhythm long after the drum has ceased. Echoes beneath the stars. The meadows are quiet now, the torches long extinguished, the drums and pipes fallen silent. Yet if you linger in the villages of Europe where such things once unfolded, you sense something more than silence. Beneath the ordinary rhythm of fields and markets, of church bells and ploughshares, lies a faint echo, distant, almost forgotten, yet never gone. It is the memory of the nights when men and women, children and nobles, peasants and priests, were all bound together by a rhythm too strong to resist, when they danced until collapse beneath the stars. You walk through a narrow lane at dusk, where swallows dart overhead and smoke curls from chimneys, and the villagers you meet seem ordinary, busy with the tasks of daily life. Yet, in their stories, told in whispers by hearthlight, the memory stirs. An elder leans close to a child and murmurs of the nights when the meadow burned with lanterns, when laughter turned to screams, when bodies writhed and stamped until dawn. The child listens with wide eyes, torn between fear and wonder, unsure whether to treat the tale as warning or as legend. For the stories of the frenzy linger not merely as history but as caution, as shadow, as possibility. Sometimes you hear the stories in a different tone, half longing, half sorrow. An old man sighs that though the frenzy was curse, it was also release, a freedom that has no place in the ordered world of daylight. He remembers the fire of movement, the equality of the circle, the moment when all burdens dissolved into rhythm. He knows the suffering, the collapse, the fear of possession, but he cannot deny that something vital was lost when the festivals faded. In his voice, you hear a yearning for a time when the stars themselves seem to whirl overhead, echoing the endless steps of men below. The priests, long since victorious in stamping out the gatherings, still speak of them in sermons not as living threat, but as example of what sin and superstition can breed. They tell of devils piping in the night, of peasants lured into frenzy, of the punishments that befell the faithless. Yet their tone has shifted from fear to authority, their words spoken more as lesson than lament. The frenzy, once overwhelming, now exists safely in the past, a tale to fortify obedience. But for all their certainty, even the priests cannot erase the whispers that persist, nor the unease that stirs whenever the wind whistles through chimneys or the river hums beneath the moonlight. The nobles, too, preserve the story, though more reluctantly. In chronicles stored in their halls, they record the days when peasants collapsed in fields, when markets dissolved into chaos, when even lords themselves were seized by invisible pipes. Their words are stiff, their tone dismissive, seeking to frame the frenzy as folly or contagion. Yet the very act of recording betrays their unease, for they remember that in those moments the walls of hierarchy cracked and the order of the world was mocked by rhythm. It is not a memory they cherish, but it is one they cannot deny. And then there are the physicians, who carry the tale into new centuries with different language. They speak of humours, of nerves, of maladies, of the brain. They coin new names, categorize new symptoms, trying to tame the mystery with reason. Yet even they, in their careful notes, preserve the same truth, that once people danced against their will, danced until collapse, danced to music no one could hear. Science explains, but explanation does not erase. The echo endures. You lift your eyes to the night sky, the same sky that watched centuries ago as peasants stamped in frenzy. The stars are unchanged, still sharp, still cold, still indifferent, and yet, in their silence, you can imagine the rhythm that once rose from earth to meet them. The torches have burned out, the masks have crumbled, the herbs have withered, but the memory remains, faint as a heartbeat in the dark. It is the echo beneath the stars, the whisper of endless steps, the shadow of a dance that was never fully of this world. And perhaps, if you listen closely, you hear it still. Not in pipes or drums, not in the laughter or screams of villagers, but in the silence itself, the faintest pulse, the ghost of rhythm. For though the festivals of the Middle Ages are gone, their memory endures in the soil, in the stories, in the imagination of those who stand beneath the stars. They remind us that joy and terror are twins, that freedom and compulsion are threads of the same cloth, that humanity is never far from surrendering to forces it cannot name. The meadow is empty, the marketplace still, the shrines quiet, but the echo lingers, and on certain nights, when wind whistles through the eaves or rivers murmur against their banks, when footsteps fall in uncanny unison, one might wonder whether the invisible pipes are truly gone or whether, somewhere, just beyond hearing, they still play, waiting for the world to dance again.